Imagine standing in a room with someone you trust more than anyone else in the world. This person has shared your meals, fought by your side, and knows your deepest secrets. Now imagine that while you are looking at a map of your future together, they are reaching for a dagger or signing a piece of paper that will vanish your entire legacy from existence. History isn't just a collection of dates and battles. It is a long, interconnected chain of broken promises. We like to think that empires fall because of economics or superior military technology, but more often than not, the final blow comes from within. It's the whisper in the hallway, the secret letter sent across enemy lines, and the smile that masks a devastating intent. Today, we are diving into the most shocking betrayals that didn't just hurt an individual, but actually rerouted the entire flow of human civilization. We are talking about the moments where a single person's choice to turn their back changed the map of the world forever. From the marble floors of Rome to the humid jungles of the Americas and the high-stakes diplomacy of the world wars. Get ready to see just how fragile the bond of loyalty really is. We start with the gold standard of all betrayals, a moment so famous it has its own catchphrase. We are going to Rome. 44 BC Julius Caesar was at the height of his power. He had expanded the Roman Republic beyond its wildest dreams and had just been declared dictator for life. He felt invincible. But in the shadows of the Senate, a group of men who called themselves the Liberators were plotting his downfall. At the center of this group was Marcus Junius Brutus. This wasn't just any political rival. Brutus was a close friend, a man Caesar treated almost like a son. Caesar had pardoned Brutus after a previous civil war, given him high office, and trusted him implicitly. The conspirators knew they needed Brutus because his family name was synonymous with the founding of the Roman Republic and the overthrow of kings. On the Ides of March, as Caesar entered the theater of Pompeii, he was surrounded. When the first blow landed, he fought back with the strength of a veteran legionnaire. But the legend says that when he saw Brutus among the attackers, he stopped fighting. He pulled his toga over his head and accepted the end. The famous line, "Et tu, Brute," captures the soul-crushing realization that the person he loved most was the one who ensured his departure. But here's the twist. Brutus thought he was saving the Republic. Instead, his betrayal triggered a massive civil war that ended the Republic forever and birthed the Roman Empire. Brutus wanted to stop a king, but he accidentally created a line of emperors that would rule for centuries. It's a classic example of how a betrayal intended to preserve a system can actually be the very thing that destroys it. Now, let's travel across the Atlantic to the early 16th century, to the fall of the Aztec Empire. We often hear about Hernán Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors, but the truth is that a few hundred Europeans could never have taken down a civilization of millions on their own. They had a secret weapon. A woman named Malintzin, better known as La Malinche. She was a Naha woman who had been sold into slavery and eventually given to the Spanish. She wasn't just a translator. She was a brilliant strategist who understood the complex political tensions within the Aztec Empire. Malinche showed Cortés exactly where the fractures were. She helped him negotiate alliances with the Tlaxcalans and other groups who hated Aztec rule. She acted as the bridge that allowed the Spanish to bypass the Aztec defenses and strike at the heart of Tenochtitlan. To many in modern Mexico, she is seen as the ultimate symbol of betrayal, the person who handed her own culture over to foreign invaders. But for Malinche, who had been discarded by her own people, loyalty was a luxury she couldn't afford. Regardless of her motivations, her choice to facilitate the Spanish conquest didn't just end an empire. It fundamentally changed the genetics, language, and religion of an entire continent. The world as we know it today would look completely different if she had chosen to remain silent. Moving to the American Revolution, we encounter a name that has become a literal synonym for a traitor: Benedict Arnold. Before he was a villain, Arnold was one of George Washington's most brilliant and daring generals. He was a hero at the Battle of Saratoga, a victory that convinced the French to join the American cause. But Arnold felt unappreciated. He was passed over for promotions, hounded by political enemies, and deeply in debt. He began a secret correspondence with the British, offering to hand over the strategic fort at West Point in exchange for a high rank in the British Army and a massive sum of money. The betrayal was discovered just in time when a British spy, Major John Andre, was captured with the plans in his boot. Arnold managed to escape to the British side, but his reputation was forever charred. Washington was devastated, famously asking, "Whom can we trust now?" But here is the interesting part. Arnold's betrayal actually unified the struggling American colonies. The shock of his defection created a surge of renewed patriotism. People who were on the fence about the war were so disgusted by Arnold's actions that they rallied behind the cause of independence. Arnold wanted to secure his own future at the cost of his country, but his failure actually helped ensure the birth of the United States. He spent the rest of his life in England, a man without a country, mistrusted even by the people he had tried to help. In the medieval world, few betrayals were as consequential as the Fourth Crusade in 1204. This was supposed to be a holy expedition to retake Jerusalem. Instead, it turned into one of the most shameful episodes in history. The Crusaders found themselves in massive debt to the Republic of Venice, which had built their fleet. To pay off the debt, the Venetians convinced the Crusaders to divert their mission to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire and the largest Christian city in the world at the time. A young Byzantine prince had promised the Crusaders vast wealth and military support if they helped him take the throne. When he couldn't deliver on his promises, the Crusaders turned on their fellow Christians. They spent 3 days ransacking the city, destroying ancient libraries, and carrying away golden treasures that still sit in Venice today. This betrayal didn't just hurt the Byzantines, it permanently weakened the eastern bulwark of Europe. By shattering the Byzantine Empire, the Crusaders paved the way for future invasions that would change the balance of power between the East and the West for the next 500 years. It remains a reminder of what happens when greed and a lack of clear leadership turn a sacred mission into a predatory one. Let's look at the Far East, specifically Japan in 1582. Oda Nobunaga was the man who had almost succeeded in unifying Japan after a century of constant civil war. He was a visionary leader who embraced new technologies like firearms. But during a stay at the Honnoji Temple in Kyoto, he was betrayed by one of his most trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide. Without warning, Mitsuhide surrounded the temple and set it on fire. Nobunaga, seeing no escape, chose to depart on his own terms rather than be captured. Mitsuhide's motivations remain a mystery to this day. Some say he felt insulted by Nobunaga, others say he feared for his own safety. Whatever the reason, his betrayal could have plunged Japan back into chaos. However, Nobunaga's other top general, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, marched at an incredible speed to defeat Mitsuhide in just 11 days. Mitsuhide is remembered in Japan as the 13-day shogun. While the betrayal was shocking, it ultimately led to a more stable unification under Hideyoshi and later the Tokugawa shogunate. It shows us that a betrayal can create a power vacuum that is quickly filled by someone even more determined to see a vision through to the end. In the context of the World Wars, the story of Vidkun Quisling is particularly dark. He was a Norwegian politician who, during the Nazi invasion of Norway in 1940, staged a coup and declared himself the leader of the country. He actively collaborated with the occupiers, helping them round up his own citizens and implement their ideology. His name became so notorious that it entered the English language as a noun meaning a person who collaborates with an enemy force. Quisling's betrayal was a blow to the heart of Norwegian identity. He believed he was securing Norway's place in a new world order, but he was actually just a puppet. When the war ended, the Norwegian people were so determined to hold him accountable that they temporarily reinstated a certain high-level punishment just to ensure he faced the ultimate consequence. His story is a warning about the lure of power and how a person can convince themselves that betraying their neighbors is somehow an act of leadership. He died a pariah, his name forever associated with the ultimate form of national disloyalty. We cannot talk about betrayal without mentioning one of the most complex figures of the 20th century, the spy Kim Philby. He was a high-ranking officer in British intelligence and a man who had access to the most sensitive secrets of the Western world. He was charming, well-connected, and seemingly the perfect gentleman. But for 30 years, Philby was a double agent for the Soviet Union. He betrayed hundreds of agents, many of whom vanished into the darkness of the Eastern Bloc, and he funneled massive amounts of secret information to Moscow during the height of the Cold War. When the truth finally came out in the 1960s, it shattered the trust between the British and American intelligence services. It made the West realize that the enemy wasn't just on the other side of the Iron Curtain, they were sitting at the desk next to you. Philby's betrayal changed the way intelligence is handled forever, leading to an era of intense vetting and internal surveillance. He eventually escaped to Moscow, where he was treated as a hero, but friends back in England felt the personal sting of his deception until their final days. He proved that a quiet betrayal from a man with a pen and a martini can be more damaging than an entire army. In the ancient kingdom of Israel, the story of Absalom's rebellion against his father, King David, is a masterclass in familial betrayal. Absalom was David's favorite son, a man renowned for his beauty and charisma. But he wasn't content to wait for the throne. He spent years sitting at the city gates, listening to the grievances of the people and telling them, "If only I were judge in the land, I would give everyone justice." He slowly turned the hearts of the people away from his father. When the time was right, Absalom declared himself king and forced David to flee Jerusalem in tears. The betrayal wasn't just political. It was a deeply personal rejection of a father by a son. The ensuing civil war tore the kingdom apart. Even after Absalom was defeated, David's grief was so profound that it overshadowed the victory for his troops. It's a story that shows how betrayal within a family can be the most painful of all, leaving scars that no amount of political success can ever truly heal. Now, let's look at a betrayal that happened in the world of high-stakes science and exploration. In the early 20th century, the race to the South Pole was the ultimate test of human endurance. Roald Amundsen, a Norwegian explorer, had publicly stated he was heading for the North Pole. Even his own crew believed that was the destination. But when he received word that 2 Americans claimed to have already reached the North Pole, Amundsen made a secret, lightning-fast decision. Without telling his financial backers or the Norwegian government, he changed course and headed for the South Pole. He didn't even inform his great rival, Robert Falcon Scott, who thought he was the only one in the race. This betrayal of expectations and gentlemanly conduct in the world of exploration was seen by many as a dishonorable move. However, Amundsen's secrecy gave him the edge he needed to reach the pole first. While it wasn't a betrayal that ended an empire, it was a moment where a breach of protocol changed the history of exploration and led to a tragic outcome for Scott's team. It shows that in the pursuit of glory, the first person to break the rules often wins the prize, but loses a certain level of respect in the eyes of history. In the world of the Romanovs, we have the story of Grigory Rasputin. While he wasn't a military leader or a politician, his influence over the Russian Empress Alexandra was seen by the Russian nobility as a betrayal of the traditional power structures. They believed this mad monk was secretly controlling the fate of the Russian Empire while the Tsar was away at the front during World War I. The betrayal here was twofold. The nobility felt betrayed by their Tsar for allowing Rasputin into the inner circle, and in response, they decided to betray their own oaths of loyalty by orchestrating Rasputin's removal in a night of chaotic violence. This act of internal treachery didn't save the monarchy. Instead, it further destabilized the empire and paved the way for the Russian Revolution. It shows how the perception of betrayal can be just as dangerous as the act itself, creating a cycle of mistrust that can bring down a dynasty that has lasted for 300 years. Let's return to the ancient world to discuss the betrayal of the Spartan king Leonidas at the Battle of Thermopylae. We all know the story of the 300 Spartans holding off the massive Persian army, but they weren't defeated by frontal assault. They were betrayed by a local man named Ephialtes of Trachis. Eager for a reward from the Persian king Xerxes, Ephialtes showed the Persians a secret mountain path that allowed them to outflank the Greek position. Ephialtes' name, like Quisling's, has become a word for a nightmare or a traitor in the Greek language. His betrayal ended the heroic stand of the Spartans, but it did something else as well. It gave the rest of Greece the time they needed to prepare their naval and land forces, eventually leading to the defeat of the Persians at Salamis and Plataea. The betrayal led to a tactical loss for the Spartans, but it created an immortal symbol of sacrifice and resistance that unified Greece and helped birth the foundations of Western civilization. It's a recurring theme in history. A betrayal might win the battle, but the legacy of the betrayed often wins the war. In the complex web of European history, the betrayal of the Duke of Marlborough is a fascinating case of political shifting. John Churchill, the first Duke of Marlborough, was a brilliant general who won a string of impossible victories for England during the War of the Spanish Succession. He was the hero of the nation. But as the political winds changed in London, his own government turned on him. They used rumors of financial corruption to strip him of his command and exile him from the country he had saved. This betrayal of a national hero showed that in the world of power, past services mean very little compared to current political needs. Churchill survived the ordeal and eventually returned to favor, but it remains a classic example of how a nation can turn its back on its most capable defenders when the priorities of the ruling class shift. Think about the betrayal of the Chinese general Wu Sangui. In 1644, as the Ming dynasty was collapsing under a peasant rebellion, Wu Sangui was guarding the Shanhai Pass against the invading Manchus. Faced with a choice between a rebel leader who had captured his family and the foreign Manchu forces, Wu Songui chose to open the gates of the Great Wall. He betrayed his dynasty and his people by letting the invaders in. This act led to the end of the Ming and the rise of the Qing dynasty, which would rule China for the next 250 years. Wu Songui spent the rest of his life as a wealthy but mistrusted official, eventually attempting his own rebellion against the very manshas he had helped. His story is one of a man who tried to navigate a collapsing world by making a deal with the enemy, only to realize that once you become a traitor, you belong to no one. The psychology of betrayal is a study in human frailty. Most of the people we've discussed didn't wake up one morning and decide to be a villain. They were often people who felt they were making the hard choice, the practical choice, or the only choice. Brutus thought he was saving Rome. Malinche thought she was surviving. Benedict Arnold thought he was getting the respect he deserved. This is what makes betrayal so shocking. It often comes from people who believe they are doing the right thing, or at least the necessary thing. But the consequences of these acts are almost always larger than the individuals involved. A betrayal acts like a stone thrown into a pond. The ripples extend far beyond the initial splash. When the Knights Templar were betrayed by King Philip, it fundamentally changed the banking and military structures of Europe. When the Fourth Crusade betrayed Constantinople, it changed the religious and political map of the Mediterranean. These individual acts of deception acted as catalysts for massive historical shifts. Consider the role of the informer during the Irish struggle for independence. The informer became a figure of intense hatred in Irish culture because of the many times secret plans for rebellion were leaked to the British authorities. Each betrayal led to the removal of visionary leaders and the delay of independence by decades. It created a culture of secrecy and suspicion that lasted for generations. It shows that a betrayal doesn't just end a movement, it can traumatize a national identity for centuries. In the world of the Islamic Golden Age, the betrayal of the Barmakids is a sobering story of how quickly favor can turn. They were a powerful family of advisors who served the Caliph Harun al-Rashid. They were responsible for much of the administrative success of the Abbasid Caliphate. But the Caliph, fearing their growing influence and power, suddenly ordered the entire family to be vanished in a single night. This betrayal of his most loyal servants deprived the caliphate of its best administrators and began a long slide into instability. It's a reminder that for an absolute ruler, loyalty is often less important than the elimination of potential rivals. We should also reflect on the betrayal of the Native American tribes by the various colonial governments. Treaty after treaty was signed and then broken as the hunger for land grew. This was an institutionalized form of betrayal, where an entire group of people was repeatedly deceived by a system they were told they could trust. The result was the near-total destruction of many indigenous cultures and a legacy of mistrust that continues to the present day. This shows that betrayal doesn't always have to be a secret dagger. It can be an official document that is simply ignored. The story of the French general Emmanuel de Grouchy during the Battle of Waterloo is a case of accidental betrayal through rigid adherence to orders. While Napoleon was fighting for his life against Wellington, Grouchy was just a few miles away with 30,000 troops. He heard the cannons, but he refused to turn his army around because his original orders were to pursue a different part of the enemy. His hesitation and failure to act was seen by many of Napoleon's supporters as a betrayal of the emperor's genius. Whether it was incompetence or a subtle lack of will, his failure to show up at the critical moment ensured Napoleon's final defeat. It highlights a different kind of betrayal, the betrayal of an opportunity. Sometimes, doing nothing when action is required is the most devastating choice of all. As we look at these figures through the lens of history, we see that betrayal is a constant companion of power. The halls of government, the tents of generals, and the palaces of kings are all places where the air is thick with the possibility of deception. To rule is to always be looking over your shoulder. To be a citizen is to always be wondering if your leaders are who they say they are. Yet, despite all these broken promises, the world has continued to move forward. The betrayal of Caesar led to the Pax Romana. The betrayal of the Aztecs led to the birth of a new Mexican culture. The betrayal of Benedict Arnold strengthened the American resolve. History has a way of taking these dark moments and spinning them into something new, something we are still living with today. Why are we so fascinated by these stories? Perhaps it's because we've all felt a small version of betrayal in our own lives. A friend who let us down, a colleague who took credit for our work, or a family member who broke a promise. Seeing these personal dramas played out on the stage of world history makes our own experiences feel part of a much larger human tapestry. It reminds us that trust is the most valuable and fragile currency we have. In the end, the most shocking betrayals in history aren't just about the act of turning one's back. They are about the aftermath. They are about the people who picked up the pieces, nations that redefined themselves, and the lessons we've learned. They teach us to be watchful, to be skeptical, but also to value true loyalty wherever we find it. Think about the world as it is today. Our headlines are still filled with stories of leaked documents, political defections, and corporate espionage. The tools have changed, but the impulses remain exactly the same as they were in the Roman Senate or the Aztec temples. We are still a species that struggles with the temptation to trade loyalty for gain, and we are still a species that is shocked when the person next to us chooses the side of the shadow. As we conclude our journey through the annals of deception, take a moment to reflect on the stories we've explored. Brutus, Malinche, Benedict Arnold, and the rest. They aren't just names in a book. They are warnings. They are the people who reminds us that the course of history can be changed by a single whisper or a single silent act. The world is built on trust, but it is often redirected by betrayal. Stay curious about the past, because its shadows are still falling on our present. Every hero you admire might have had a rival plotting their end, and every system you trust might have a secret flaw. Understanding the history of betrayal isn't about becoming cynical. It's about becoming aware. It's about realizing that the most powerful thing in the world isn't an army or a mountain of gold. It's the promise we keep to one another. Thank you for exploring the darker side of history with us today. From the marble halls of Rome to the frozen plains of the Antarctic, we've seen that the human heart is capable of incredible loyalty and staggering deception. The story of our world is still being written, and it is up to us to decide which legacies we want to leave behind. Until next time, keep looking for the truth behind the smile. And always remember that history is more than meets the eye. Stay curious, stay alert, and continue searching for the stories that made our world what it is today.